Hello, my friends. At the beginning of many podcasts, you hear the host sell a product, a service, a beer, underwear, a job recruiting site. Here on Stand Up, I'm excited to be selling an idea. And that idea is effective altruism. And it's the idea that the nonprofit GiveWell.org rests their entire organization upon. There are over 1.5 million nonprofits in the U.S. alone. And as we enter the season of giving, how can you be sure that you're picking one where your donation will really make a difference? If you want to have the biggest impact with your donation during this giving season, then go to givewell.org/standup. For over 10 years, givewell.org has helped donors find the charities and projects that save and improve lives the most per dollar. I was introduced to this organization almost 10 years ago when I interviewed Peter Singer, who is one of the moral philosophers behind the idea of effective altruism. The idea that your giving goes the furthest. See, since 2010, GiveWell has helped over 50,000 donors direct over $500 million to the most effective charities. Most importantly, these donations will save over 75,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. And here's how. GiveWell dedicates over 20,000 hours a year researching charitable organizations and handpicks a few of the highest impact evidence-backed charities. All that research, by the way, publicly available for free on their website. More importantly, GiveWell never takes any fees. So all of your tax-deductible donations are given to the charity you choose. If you want your donation to have even more impact, act soon. Any stand-up listener who becomes a new GiveWell donor will have their first donation matched up to $250 when you go to givewell.org/standup and select podcast and Stand Up with Pete Dominick at checkout. This matching offer is good for as long as funds last. It's a special chance for even a small donation to make a huge impact. Get your first donation matched up to $250 when you go to givewell.org/standup and select podcast and Stand Up with Pete Dominick at checkout. If you want your charitable donation this holiday season to help as much as possible, but you don't know where you can give, make a bigger difference, go to givewell.org/standup right now. You don't have to be a hero to save a life. You can save and improve lives by giving to the right charities. This holiday season, give where your donation will help people most. Givewell.org/standup. I couldn't be prouder to make my first partnership sponsorship deal with givewell.org. I hope you'll consider a donation now. All right, now on to the show. Joining me today, Dr. Aaron Carroll of Indiana University, the New York Times and Healthcare Triage on YouTube, and former congressional candidate for Virginia's 1st District, Qasim Rashid. I'm Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Stand Up. Thank you for the music from listener and very talented musician John Carroll. Go to johncarroll.org, everybody, Jon. 2 R's, 2 L's, and not unlike my guest, Aaron Carroll, today. No relation, though, from what I can tell. And I actually don't have a lot to say in today's opening. I did a long search for clips that I wanted to play or things that I really wanted to mention in a little bit more detail than the news dump coming up, but nothing was really hitting me. I was super busy this afternoon and doing a bunch of interviews and a bunch of other work, and so I just, I don't know, I didn't see anything. I do want to say, a lot of people loved yesterday's show with J.L. Covan, and a lot of folks reacting to my anti-inflatable rant. And I just feel like I have to say this. I'm joking. I do it every year. It's a bit. It's just a bit. I know it sounds like I'm really angry, but that's the bit. I'm not actually angry about that. I heard from a lot of people that were saying, you're taking this too seriously, or calm down. And then, of course, most people knew that it was a bit, that I'm joking. But do I think inflatable lawn ornaments are ugly? Yes, I totally do. But am I happy that people decorate their homes for any or every holiday? Yes, I am. It brings them a lot of joy. I am in no way upset that people decorate their homes. I'm just being a dick. I'm just making... If you have inflatables, fine. It's better than nothing, even, because it brought you joy. And you think it brings other people joy, and perhaps it does. But it was just a bit. I'm not that angry. I got a couple of really weird emails that made me feel kind of bad that people took it seriously, so I felt the need to be a little bit more transparent and honest. I joke at times, and I always assume people know when I'm joking, but they don't, and so I am, and I do it every year. And the other thing is that I haven't found any evidence that inflatables actually take up more electricity than actual Christmas lights. So I used to try to get away with that rant too, but it's not. It's not more or less sustainable, apparently, from what I can tell. If anybody knows different, I'm all ears. Also, I did want to mention this story because I'm pretty obsessed with it, but a former Israeli space security chief has come out and said aliens exist and that humanity's not ready for it. This is coming from the Jerusalem Post, who writes, it's got a name, the Galactic Federation, because, of course. And it's supposedly been in contact with with Israel and the U.S. for years, but they're keeping themselves a secret to prevent hysteria until humanity is ready. I want to believe this story. I really do, but I don't believe it. According to this retired Israeli general and current professor named Haim Eshed, E-S-H-E-D, if you want to look it up, the answer is yes, but this has been kept a secret because, quote, humanity isn't ready. He actually gave the interview, I gave credit to Jerusalem Post, but actually to Yediot Aharonot, whatever that is, media outlet. And this guy who served as head of Israel's space security program for 30 years and is a 3-time recipient of the Israel Security Award. He's a respected guy. He explained that Israel and the U.S. have both been dealing with aliens for years. He says that he's 87 years old, and he gave further descriptions about exactly what sort of agreements have been made between the aliens and the U.S., which ostensibly, apparently, have been made because they wish to research and understand, quote, the fabric of the universe. This cooperation includes a secret underground base on Mars, where there are American and alien representatives. If true, this would coincide with U.S. President Donald Trump's creation of the Space Force as the 5th branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, writes the Jerusalem Post. But he also insists that Trump is aware of them, and that literally is why I don't believe it. Because nothing about me thinks that Donald Trump would keep that or anything else a secret. He says the Galactic Federation reportedly stopped him from telling anybody because he was on the verge of disclosing their existence, but he's respecting their wishes because they want to prevent mass hysteria. Nope, I don't believe it. I think that if Galactic Federation, the aliens, said they could dig up dirt on Joe Biden, he would have been happy to take it and out them. And that's why I don't believe that this story is true. And I think, sadly, this guy's making it up. I don't know what to tell you. But I did want to mention that because I am pretty obsessed with it and read all about it. But I don't believe it. Do you believe it? Let me know. Stand up with Pete at Gmail or any other way that you can contact me. I also wanted to mention the good news about a black woman taking over at the helm for MSNBC. It was announced that the president of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, is stepping down, and a woman named Rashida Jones is taking over for him. No, not the actress Rashida Jones, but a woman who has been at MSNBC for 7 years. I've actually never met Rashida. I'd heard her name because I spent a lot of time at MSNBC, but I think that it's really great news, progress to have a black woman at the helm of a major cable news network for the first time ever. That's a pretty big deal. Also, another first for black folks in America is that Joe Biden appointed a black man to be his Secretary of Defense as well. That's right. Joe Biden announced he had selected retired General Lloyd Austin to run the Department of Defense. If confirmed, the retired general will be the first black defense secretary of the United States of America. Political writes, in picking Austin, Biden has chosen a barrier-breaking former 4-star officer who was the first black general to command an Army division in combat and the first to oversee an entire theater of operations. He ran U.S. Central Command before retiring in 2016, emerged as a top-tier candidate in recent days after initially being viewed as a long shot for the job. And while Austin's nomination is racial progress, not everybody is happy with it, and a lot of people who don't think that someone from the military should be running the Pentagon, that it should be led by a civilian. Writing an opinion piece in the New York Times is Jim Golby, who has been a special advisor to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Mike Pence. And the headline is, sorry, General Lloyd Austin, a recently retired general, should not be Secretary of Defense after a tumultuous 4 years. We need civilian leadership and a return to normalcy. He writes, President-elect Joe Biden has announced key nominees for the national security team. New York Times now reporting he'll seek congressional waiver to nominate a retired Army General Lloyd Austin for Secretary of Defense, only the third time the president has requested a waiver since Congress passed the National Security Act in 1947, which requires a prospective Secretary of Defense to wait 7 years after ending active duty as a commissioned officer. President Harry Truman appointed George Marshall in 1950. Mr. Trump chose James Mattis as his first Secretary of Defense. He says General Austin is a capable, respected former commander of Central Command, but he retired only in 2016, and that's not long enough. A civilian, not a recently retired general, should lead the Pentagon. He later goes on, Jim Golby, in this New York Times piece, to write, President-elect Biden should not put Lloyd Austin nor any other recently retired general or admiral in the same position. General Austin is a fine public servant, and he may well continue his service to the nation out of uniform, but the Pentagon would be the wrong place for him to do it. Read that at the New York Times. Biden also nominated Xavier Becerra to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. CBS News reported President-elect Joe Biden nominating California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to serve as his first Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's going to have to oversee a sprawling department set to play a leading role in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccine, and he'd be tasked with helping to build public trust in it. So congratulations to all of those people. And that, I think, is progress for diversity in the American federal government and cable news. And now it's time for everybody's favorite news, COVID news. Boy, can I not wait till we don't have to deal with 50 headlines a day related to our horrible pandemic. I don't know which one is the highest ranking, most important one, but let me start with the news. I see a lot of news sites linking to a survey from Gallup saying Americans' mental health ratings are sinking to a new low. 34% say their mental health is excellent, down from 43%. How are you doing? Americans' latest assessment of their mental health is worse than it has been at any point in the last 2 decades. 76% of U.S. adults rate their mental health positively, representing a 9-point decline from 2019. The latest weakening in positive ratings from November 5th to 19th poll are undoubtedly influenced by the coronavirus pandemic, which continues to profoundly disrupt people's lives, but may also reflect views of the election, state of race relations, both of which were on Americans' minds this year. So here I am checking in with you and want to remind you that Thursday night we'll have a hangout. Thursday at 8, we'll hang out and I'll check in with everybody's state of mind. I hope you're well. I hope you're figuring it out. I've been struggling lately myself for various different reasons, and I always love to hear from people and talk and connect and know that you're not alone. So hope to see you Thursday at 8. And if you're a paid subscriber, you can join us. Just go to the show notes for all the details, or just sign up to be a paid subscriber, by the way, patreon.com/standup, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. And keep getting that vitamin N and sharing it with me. And vitamin N is the nature. I've been asking, and you have been sending photos from your walks. So many of you listen to this podcast while you're walking your dog or going for walks, and you send me pictures of nature. So wherever you are, those mean so much to me, and I hope they motivate you to get outside, if at all. So send me your photos, standupwithpete@gmail.com, or tweet them to me of any vitamin N that you're getting. A tree, a plant, a lake, a sunset, anything. I love it. It does wonders for me. Seeing your photos from all over the country, I got to put them in some kind of a picture album to share them with everybody. But I keep them coming and keep getting outside and getting that vitamin N. Also, big story from the New York Times, getting a lot of talk on Monday, is the latest in the endless Trump mismanagement of the COVID-19 virus epidemic. The headline is Trump administration passed on chance to secure more Pfizer vaccine. The pharmaceutical company offered the government a chance to lock in additional supplies before its vaccine was proved effective in clinical trials. But the administration, according to people familiar with the talks, never made the deal. A choice that now raises questions about whether the United States allowed other countries to take its place in line. A lot is going to come out of that headline. And it's hard to imagine how much damage that will do and how many lives will be lost of just more reckless mismanagement from the Trump administration on the viral epidemic that is COVID-19. I thought this was interesting, too. Monday was the 79th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. 79th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I read that 2,400 U.S. service members and civilians lost their lives that day. And I guess I just thought it was crazy because that's how many people lost their lives today to COVID-19, at least. It's I think it puts things into perspective. I mean, that's how many we're losing every day. Almost 300,000 Americans have lost their lives, and the most conservative forecasts say it could be up to 500,000 before the end of, I think it says February. It's absolutely insane. And I think the other big COVID headline comes from Florida, where it always comes from, isn't it? The Florida Department of Law Enforcement Monday raided the home of a former Department of Health data analyst who's been running an alternative website to the state's COVID dashboard, alleging that she may have broken into a state email system and sent unauthorized messages to employees. Her name is Rebecca Jones. She was fired from her job in May as a Geographic Information System Manager for the Department of Health's Division of Disease Control and Health Protection. And she also once filed a whistleblower complaint against the state, denied having any role in the alleged intrusion into the state website, instead said she believes Monday's action was intended to silence her. But she went on TV last night to talk about it because state police came into her house at gunpoint over the course of 3 hours, swept her house, took her cell phone, several laptops, pointed guns at her husband, and her kids. And there's a video of it. You can all see it. And that story's not going away. And neither is Rebecca Jones. Those are, I think, the three big stories related to COVID on Monday. And of course, a couple more headlines. California is in total lockdown, but apparently several sheriffs don't like it and aren't enforcing it. Let's see what else. Reuters is reporting that German leaders have come out Monday in favor of stricter measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus a few days after their country, Germany, posted its highest one-day death toll so far. Chancellor Angela Merkel told party colleagues that existing lockdown measures with bars and restaurants closed and shops admitting limited numbers were too little to get the virus under control. She said, "The situation is getting very serious. These measures will not be enough to get us through the winter." Daily infections are no longer rising as sharply as previously in Germany, Europe's largest economy, but they have stagnated at a high level, and the highest single-day coronavirus toll yet was reported last Wednesday. All right, well, I'm mostly just reading news here, and hopefully you appreciated it. And now it's time for the news dump, which is basically the same as what I've been doing, but it's faster, and none of these stories are related really to overtly to politics or COVID. I do this every day at this time, and it's time for the news dump.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
All right, let's start off with a fun one, that breakdancing is going to be a sport in the Olympics 2024 Paris Games. Also, skateboarding, sport climbing, and surfing are going to be debuting at the delayed games in Tokyo next year. But I'm very excited about that. I was a pretty serious breakdancer growing up. I don't want to brag, but I may have to dust off the Chuck Taylors and parachute pants. How about this one? You hear about this one? Bob Dylan sold his entire songwriting catalog in a major deal. 600 songs, a Nobel Prize, and so much more for Bob Dylan. The price is not disclosed, but is estimated at more than $300 million. Bob Dylan, by the way, 79 years old. Wow. Stocks closed mostly lower on Wall Street Monday after taking a pause from their recent rally. The S&P 500 lost 0.2%. So sad. Companies that would benefit most from the reopening economy, like banks and industrial stocks, took some of the sharper losses. Technology stocks, meanwhile, according to Newser.com, bucked the downward trend and rose, pushing the NASDAQ to another record high. And this is all a result of COVID cases surging, outside of tech stocks being the exception there. The Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, is headed to Brussels in a last-ditch attempt to get a Brexit deal. Not likely to happen. Senior government source said there is every chance a Brexit trade deal between the UK and EU will not be reached. So, no good news there. What a horrible mistake that was for them, according to, I think, everybody, right? No? CNN is reporting that China is going to expand their weather modification program to cover an area larger than India. I didn't know they had a weather modification program. That's terrifying. China this week revealed plans to drastically expand an experimental weather modification program to cover an area of over 5.5 million square kilometers, more than 1.5 times the total size of India, according to a statement from the State Council. China will have, quote, developed a weather modification system by 2025, thanks to breakthroughs in fundamental research and key technologies, as well as improvements in comprehensive prevention against safety risk. I don't know what I just read from CNN.com, but I don't think, do we have a weather modification program? If we do, I'd love to tell my wife about it, because she does not like the weather in December or January or February or March or November. So maybe we could do something about that. And I guess this headline is COVID related, but I should have mentioned it earlier. Millions of hungry Americans are turning to food banks for the first time. The deadly pandemic, reporting the Associated Press. In this article, they write, the pandemic of 2020 with illness, job loss, and business closures, millions more Americans are worried about empty refrigerators and barren cupboards. Food banks are doling out meals at a rapid pace, and an Associated Press data analysis found a sharp rise in the amount of food distributed compared with last year. Meanwhile, some folks are skipping meals so their children can eat, and others dependent on cheap food that lacks nutrition. Horrible outcome, and also a totally predictable one. We have to do better. And the final news dump story today, IKEA is getting rid of its iconic catalog, one of the most popular books in the world, ending a 70-year print run. I never saw the IKEA catalog, so I guess I won't miss it. The first one was launched in 1951. IKEA's been around that long? Apparently they print 200 million copies a year, making it one of the world's most popular books. Oh, who gives a shit about IKEA? I don't even know why I read that one. All right, that is your news dump. Now, let's get to my first guest, Dr. Aaron Carroll. Aaron and I are very close friends and have been for over 10 years now. I met him for the first time when he was a guest on my SiriusXM radio show talking about health policy and the run-up to the Affordable Care Act. He's a health policy expert. He's an author. He's a pediatrician. He's a YouTuber. His YouTube channel, Healthcare Triage, is very popular and has won a journalism award, as a matter of fact. He is also an opinion writer at the New York Times, and most importantly right now, his most important role is leading the mitigation efforts at Indiana University, and he had a very controversial take at the New York Times and his latest opinion piece, and that's a lot of what we talked about, as well as a couple of other things. He's on Twitter at Aaron E. Carroll. If you're not already following him, you should be. One of my all-time favorites. Here is my latest conversation with Dr. Aaron Carroll. I'm recording. Yeah. I am recording. And Dr. Aaron Carroll. It's annoying that you have the very best camera of anybody on the internet. I interview several people every week, and no one can even come close to your camera quality. The question is, who do you think you are?
I've actually been on TV programs where they're like, "Are you in studio?" I'm like, "I'm in my studio."
So great.
It's equipment. I mean, that's all it is.
The lens,
equipment,
right?
And a good internet connection.
Does the lens?
Anyone can have this if they're willing to spend the money.
It's the lens, though, right? More than anything else, you have a great camera lens.
The most expensive thing in this whole unit is the lens. The camera's not cheap either, but the lens is the most expensive.
Your lens is made of diamonds and gold. Is that right?
No, it's diamonds and small children's bones.
Oh, that's right. That's why it's so high quality. The secret ingredient is that
it's very hard to make.
Have you ever heard of this adrenochrome, by the way? Adrenochrome? No. You haven't heard of it? No. It's the QAnon thing where the baby's blood.
Is that what that is? No, I've not heard of the official word.
It's the idea that they, if you draw blood from a child who is scared, and then you put that blood in yourself, I guess it gives you health, everlasting life. Tom Hanks is apparently doing it. So what they do is they torture the kids, and then while they're scared, they draw the blood. And this
aren't there like multiple movies about that? Like that's like that's a horror premise.
But we used to argue the individual mandate. Now we are like, that's not happening. Like what? Where? How do I even argue?
Oh my God. Remember death panels were a thing? Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Lots to talk with you about, including this very controversial column that you've written. You're now writing for opinion for New York Times. So you asked for it. And we're going to get to that column. But before we get to the column, about COVID and to stop shaming people for traveling, and people are probably already triggered by me just saying that, I think it's really important that we establish the fact that you have been in the trenches fighting COVID, literally saving lives. You are running the mitigation efforts basically at Indiana University. I know you're going to play it down, but the point is, you understand the policies at this point that are most effective because you're literally implementing them at a major university.
So
designing
with
them.
others, with others, I lead our COVID effort. So I am nominally in charge of, I think I'm director of mitigation. I think it's director of asymptomatic testing and mitigation is what they call it. So I am in charge of having built up our asymptomatic testing scheme. So now this is where I will say at IU, basically what we've done is implement the playbook that I have been advocating for from a public standpoint since, God, it feels like March. Like, first of all, more than enough symptomatic testing for anybody. So anyone who is sick with any symptoms at all can immediately get on to a telehealth visit, can talk to a healthcare professional. And if they are any symptoms at all, they get sent right away, symptomatic testing, nasopharyngeal swab, PCR, it happens. We never get above capacity. Like we have more than enough for all of our 120,000 constituents across our many campuses at IU. That's step one. Step two is contact tracing and isolation, where we have invested and built up a massive contact tracing workforce. That we have a whole sea of contact tracers who only work for IU. They work in conjunction with the state, but we have more than enough contact tracers, again, to track down all the cases that occur in our 120,000 constituents. I think right now our median time to closing a case is, I kid you not, an hour. So like from when we get the results during the day to when we figure out the contact, every case we get, our median time to close it is like an hour. We've flooded the zone with all the public health contact tracing that I have been begging, the country and the state to put in place for months. And then the third part, which is what I'm charged, is massive levels of asymptomatic testing. So we don't just do symptomatic testing. We do asymptomatic testing. We test enough of a random sample of all our constituents, students, faculty, and staff that we can, identify with like precision, say like plus or minus 1%, the prevalence of COVID every week amongst faculty, students, staff on all of our campuses. So we do, like I said, a random sample, but then we also target a significant amount of tests where I know that the disease are. So we have universally tested every kid in a dorm in Bloomington, every kid in a Greek house. We've been upsampling houses or dorms all of that. Sometimes we test all of the athletes if they seem to be at high risk one week to the next. But we do usually somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 tests a week. And we've been doing that since August. We should start back. I did on-arrival testing. So we tested 14,500 kids with antigen tests as they arrived. So they arrived in a car with their parents. We rolled down windows. We took a nasal sample. We had them line up in 4 lines, 4 cars each. Then we get a car topper. We immediately ran into a field lab where we did the antigen test. We'd get results of them usually in 20, 25 minutes. We'd be waiting in a parking lot. Negative, they can move in. Positive, go home. Where you got to isolate, or we moved them into an isolation dorm that we set up. So we could constantly keep people in quarantine and isolation, which is another part. We had enough quarantine and isolation facility for all our congregate living students on all of our dorms.
That's expensive.
So that they could be safe when they needed to. We tested tens of thousands of people as they arrived. We tested like 12,000 people a week. And while that was going on, we also built up labs on campus. So we now have 2 labs in Indianapolis, 1 lab in Bloomington, which do saliva-based PCR tests. We have the capability right now. We can do about 25,000 tests a week. We did almost that the week before Thanksgiving, just in those labs. But it's our goal to keep ramping that up so that by the time students start coming back in February, we can do about 50,000 a week. Totally asymptomatic, totally covering our constituents, running that, collecting that many samples, getting into the lab, running that many a day. We are massively responding to COVID. And so when people are like, then we don't, now this is what I've been saying, that this is, don't get me wrong, this is what the state should do. This is what the country should do. We should all have this.
Well, to be clear, though, what's I think even more impressive is you are managing Indiana University, which is in Indiana, in case people didn't know.
Yeah.
The state of Indiana has not enforced the same type of policies, and they've had some pretty horrible consequences as a result. So you're actually in that state managing it, which I think is important.
And let's also own that we put in a lot of policies as well. So like all the classes are dedensified so that no one ever sits within 6 feet of another human being. We require universal masking on campus. We beg people to spend time outside. Hand sanitizer is ubiquitous. We clean all the time. We make sure ventilation is good. So we're doing everything that I ask the country to do. Everything I ask the state to do is what I've been pushing, and we've been pushing like our school to do. And it's resulted in incredibly low positivity rates that remained quite low, even as the state had exponential growth starting in like October-ish. And so while Indiana's gone from, hundreds of cases a day to like 5,000 to 10,000 cases a day, IU's overall prevalence stayed at around 1% on pretty much most of our campuses throughout the semester, even through when we sent them home and right before Thanksgiving.
Which is a huge accomplishment, and congratulations to you and your colleagues at IU for that. It's
huge. It is. I cannot stress enough, a monster team effort. The number of people that have been working on this is stunning. There have been moments when, I kid you not, I've turned to Amy and I've said, this has restored my faith in humanity.
Wow.
We're just seeing how, oh my God, when
sounds like something does matter.
Yeah, well, this would be one of the things. So when we did the on-arrival testing back in August, we did it in Bloomington. We did it on the stadium parking lot, and I went down just the first day to make sure that everything was going to go smoothly. And there were like 100 people working the site just to get these students through every day. So we could do more than 2,000 students a day, but it took about 100 people working, the labs, the collections, the logistics. And these are not people trained in COVID. These are like the people that usually do events or work in student health or IT or some other part of the university, but really wanted to volunteer and help because they wanted IU to be a success. It was stunning. Like, honestly, like, they were there to work. And that kind of can-do attitude, I've seen it throughout this semester, where people were just geared up and ready to do everything that they could to make this as safe as possible for everybody. And it's the kind of thing that, like, again, restored my faith in humanity at times. And it's made me very sad because I feel like we utterly lack that throughout the country. And that has not been the response that I've seen.
Quick science question. It's my understanding that well, you can't actually you can't prove how someone contracts a virus. You can't scientifically prove how I got any virus.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
It's my understanding that there's been no statistics of surface contraction. You touch something, then touch yourself.
No.
And then
fact,
finally,
analyses. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, finally, why are we washing our hands if we're not shaking anybody's hands? I don't need to wash my hands. I'm not touching.
Well, if you're not shaking anybody's hands, you still should wash your hands, because no matter what, first of all, there's other illnesses out there in the world besides COVID.
All right.
So wash your hands for that reason. So it's good practice no matter what to wash your hands before you eat, because you don't want to get rotavirus. You don't want to get norovirus. You don't want to get flu, and there's plenty of other bad stuff in the world that exists besides COVID. So even if you're, hunkering down for the most part, washing your hands, especially before you eat, is always a good idea.
But why am I losing my mind if I use the gas pump and then forgot to wash my hands?
Well, not from a COVID standpoint, you might be okay. But again, there's other crap out there
that you can get from surface.
I keep hand sanitizer in the car, and anytime I do something like that, I immediately get in and I hand sanitize. Because again, it's just at this point, part of it is like we should be building up new routines and skills to keep us safe.
Right.
And that is a phenomenally good one.
We shouldn't, though, be shaking hands in general.
No, I don't shake hands anymore.
Yeah.
Like, no. Like, I try not to make physical contact with many people.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's like common sense stuff will work, but the more you can do, the better. But again, on top of the common sense and the moralizing and the telling people do better, like, we need to set up infrastructure which takes care of people, not to mention the fact that we have to still put up the money to support people who are penalized in many ways by the public health measures that we're begging them to take. And we're doing none of that. We just keep moralizing and telling people what to do.
So this column that you wrote in the New York Times titled, "Yes, People Are Traveling for the Holidays. Stop Shaming Them. Denouncing others might make you feel good about yourself, but it rarely corrects bad behavior," has been apparently one of the most controversial things that you've ever written in your life. And before we get to it, to help me understand how public health experts look at behavior as opposed to things like nutrition and medicine, because a lot of the comments from smart people reference shaming around things like sugary drinks, or more likely smoking. and how that works. So the argument has to do with policy and making certain laws versus kind of cultural behaviors and the way that we talk to people and talk about people and talk to them, especially when it comes to shaming them. How much do we know about other issues before we get to COVID in terms of how our behavior affects?
Well, I mean, shaming people in general is not the most effective way, or at least often is not a most
What
really
if it makes me feel better?
Well, sometimes I think some people do feel better when they shame others. I mean, Lord knows, look, at times during this pandemic, I have felt that way. Like, there's no question. I get angry. Like, you see pictures of people spring break. I remember seeing all those people in like one of those lakes in like Missouri or something. And I'm like, yeah, like, what are you doing? But again, it's like, that's, coming down on them hard is not the productive way to change their behavior. Publicly shaming them does not usually get people to change their behavior. Often it hardens their perceptions. Getting into fights, shaming anti-vaccinated, people who are against the vaccines does not get them to vaccinate their children. It hardens them, hardens the opinions and makes them even more set. In fact, I think sometimes a lot of the public efforts where we all start doing this on Twitter normalizes the behavior. This happens with like vaccines, for instance, where like I think it's like 1% of kids receive no vaccines in the United States. It's a very tiny percentage. And yet the outsized attention that we pay to, what some people call anti-vaxxers makes it seem like it's a huge movement. It normalizes it. It makes it like, oh, that's an equal and opposite group that we should treat as a big problem. The same thing happened when the anti-lockdown protests happened. It was like wall-to-wall news. There was a protest, I think it was in Maryland, where there were more media requests to cover the anti-lockdown protesters than there were anti-lockdown protesters who showed up. But you would have thought, watching the news those weeks, that this was a huge segment of the United States, a real big group. And the more attention and the more, fuel you give to the fire, the more it seemed like something we need to really pay attention to, as opposed to focusing on the fact that the vast majority of Americans were more than willing to shelter in place for the safety of others. So it can give oxygen and importance and space sometimes to views that are real minority. But it's like I was trying to come at this from a place of like, if we want to get the most number of people to try to do the right thing, I'm not sure that shaming them is the best way to get there. But clearly some people disagree. I
want to read not the horrible, mean comments on Twitter, but the ones that I think are more, thoughtful, including, I think the hardest one, which comes from our friend Martha Burns, because she seems like she's not fully on board with what you're saying. And she is a nurse, and she did arrange for you to get a PS5.
By the way, I responded to Martha in private. I just did not respond to her on. Well,
you saw my response. I
also had no interest.
I wrote, I think this article is garbage and you should take your PS5 back. And then I felt horrible that I had to, as a comedian, I had to write in parentheses, kidding. But what she writes is, I think I understand what you're saying in this piece, which I haven't really let you explain yet, that shaming doesn't actually change bad behavior. And I agree. But at the same time, their bad behavior is negatively affecting society. It's kind of hard to stay silent when they're actively and willingly create harm.
And okay, so fine. It's like, first of all, it's like, then if we believe that is, then shut down travel. Close the planes down. Like, say it's not okay. Or say, okay, you know what? It's not okay to gather in big groups. So we're going to also close down restaurants and bars and make this consistent and the same for everybody, and say that we cannot get together in groups bigger than pick a number, period. And we're also going to say, we're going to financially support people, because when we put these kinds of restrictions in place, then we're going to recognize that restaurants and bars are going to be financially supported, and so will the airlines, and so will lots of other groups, because these are the actions that we must take to keep us healthy. That will likely change behavior, and that will get results. What I don't think will get results is people just constantly preaching personal responsibility and telling lots of other people you're doing it wrong. But I'm not saying people shouldn't feel angry. I'm not saying that there's not injustice. I'm angry too. I was trying to talk about like, how can we channel that anger most productively? And again, it's like, I'm freely owning that clearly people disagree.
Another comment comes from, again, I'm just reading the people who I know that know you. Megan May, who is a virologist at the University of Maine or University of New England, writes that you're absolutely right that shaming almost never corrects bad behavior. That said, the collective suffers from these individual bad choices, and it really has to stop. What is the anecdote here? Antidote.
Well, absolutely the individual. So, but people kept using drunk driving as an example, and I'm like, we don't moralize against drunk driving. We passed laws making it illegal. That's what brought down drunk driving.
Same thing with cigarettes, right?
If you want to, what?
Same thing with smoking cigarettes. Same thing with smoking cigarettes.
Well, I mean, we did. Yeah, it's a lot of things. Like we passed taxes and other things, and like we made it illegal to smoke in a bunch of areas, and all of that together affects change. It's not just like there's sometimes I think like if you look, it's almost like we're letting the politicians off the hook. Like we're being like, all we need is personal responsibility. They don't need to do anything. We can just point fingers at each other and control this. That's not going to happen. I don't think that's the best way to control this. And I think that we can more productively take the anger. But again, like it's an opinion. I know probably people are going to watch this and get angry all over again. And I get it. I hear you. But I think that there are better things we could do.
You say the focus on blame is unhelpful because what really matters is that people do as much as they reasonably can to prevent the spread of disease, not that everyone adhere to the same set of rigid standards. So what do you mean by that? What's an example of?
Well, okay, so what about the people that work in restaurants where the government doesn't appear to be, saying that we should close restaurants nor financially supporting them? So they have to get on public transportation and travel to work and hang out with tons of other people. Are they evil? Like, should we shame them? No. Like, I just think that it's like it is. And I think I wrote about this, but it got lost at the end, unfortunately. But like sometimes being able to follow the rules really, really well is a privilege. I can very easily sit in this home office by myself, wall myself off from others, continue to work, have food delivered. The world will continue spinning for me. It's going to be okay. That is privilege. It's real privilege.
Right.
And to then, point out at some people who can't maintain that kind of rigidity and say like, they're not doing it right. And then I'm not sure. Now people will counter that there are people doing terrible things and we should shame them, that they do have, the ability to do more and they're choosing not to. And that may be true, but you rarely know that from a tweet. It is very hard to look at a picture on the internet and know people's lives and be really sure about what they can and can't do.
In the comments of your article, Lindsay writes, I'm tired of people shaming each other for basic human behavior when our government has not enacted nationwide paid sick leave and invested in universal access to health care isn't even on the table. We're social creatures and mental health impacts of isolation are real. I thought that was a really good point from Lindsay in California.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the CDC didn't get around to telling people, like, don't travel on Thanksgiving till like the week before Thanksgiving.
Right. That's
like,
a good point.
It's not as if people knew this 3 months. Like, and you could say they did, and I swear to you, this is really hard for many people to understand. But like, a lot of people are not as plugged into this every single day as some. Like, there are people that are on Twitter and like constantly following the COVID news on a daily basis. And then there are people just trying to get by who don't know. I get asked the same questions about how to manage COVID every day. And all I feel like I do is talk about COVID every day. That's fine. That's how this stuff gets out. Communication is hard. So if people had, taken their vacation and bought their plane tickets and, didn't know really that it wasn't okay to travel because in their states, things are open and it's all okay. And, the week before, all of a sudden, they started getting oxygen and real traction in the news. I'm just as angry at the CDC as I am at many individuals who make these, just like I'm trying to channel it productively and not spend, and I get that not being angry is a privilege too. I do.
Yep.
But there's, there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of suffering. I'm not denying any of that. I'm not trying to compare mine to anybody else's. And I fully own that I have had it in many ways easy in this pandemic. I've had it hard in others, but in some ways it has been easier, and I get that.
I mean, I love this piece. I thought it was very interesting for a lot of different reasons. But you're right. I understand that COVID-19 shaming is rooted in frustration. We're angry about our inability to get a handle on the pandemic. But our quest to scold and lay blame, even when we're publicly calling out truly bad actors, we're just making ourselves feel superior, which only makes it harder to achieve the solidarity needed for shared sacrifice. And you write so much more. But the sanctimony is something that a lot of people are commenting on. And sanctimony doesn't actually work to solve anything.
No. And I mean, I got a lot of people who are angry because they think that that they either have a right or this is, that people have earned anger and ire and spite. And I hear you. I just, I'm trying, my goal is to change as much behavior as possible. My goal is to get as many people to follow the regulations, to push this as far as we can in terms of doing good. I'm just not sure that is working, and I see a lot of it, but I get it. I hear that there are people who disagree.
What we need more than anything is vaccines and rapid tests. How do you feel about the next 6 weeks to 2 months?
I think that, look, the vaccines are unequivocal good. They're great.
I hear there's some problems, though, in the chain of custody and getting them into the actual.
Well, it's just it's going to still take months before we see anything from that. It's not going to be like an overnight change. That's going to be come January, we're all going to be doing great. They're going to get healthcare workers first, maybe some nursing home people. That'll still take January, February, and then we'll start countrywide distribution. I'm skeptical about the uptake. I'm skeptical about about whether we can do this equitably or whether it's going to increase disparities and line jumping and everything else, how long it's going to take, and then when it will really see an effect. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to loosen up immediately. We need to get those people on board to hunker down. Yeah. We need to get buy-in that even while vaccines are being rolled out, and it might be slowly, that we're all doing everything we still need to do to be safe. Again, that's why it's I'm really about we need solidarity and a shared sense of sacrifice, and we need to support people who are being asked to do things which are financially very difficult for them.
Last question on policy here. I read that half of New York City Fire Department firefighters say they won't take the vaccine. Half. My immediate reaction was you don't have to, but you can't be a firefighter. Same thing with school. You don't have to take the vaccine, but you can't come to school.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that. That's not going to fly.
So that wouldn't work as policy as law.
No, I mean, we can barely get people to take, the flu shot in a good year has 50% uptake. I'm worried. I'm seriously worried. Because again, it's there's a lot of the country that does not take this seriously and thinks it's overblown and listens to conspiracy theory. And there's a lot of people with legitimate long-term mistrust of the healthcare system. I saw an article today, I think Charles Blow in the New York Times was talking about the legitimate mistrust that African Americans have of the healthcare system. I get that. We have not put in the time and effort to rebuild those bonds and trusts. I wrote about some of that a year or two ago at the New York Times, I think even, or maybe a couple of years ago. It's real. And so we have a lot of work to do, bringing people together and on board to believe and do the things we need to do to be safe. That includes vaccines. And we're not putting in the hard effort and the resources necessary to do that.
All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today. This is a great piece. I highly recommend people read it and send to Aaron nice things. He's received a tremendous amount of abuse over this column. That can't be fun. Thank you, Aaron Carroll. Oh, I think I somehow cut off his goodbye. That's Dr. Aaron Carroll at Indiana University. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and read him at the New York Times, of course, and read that column. Very controversial. What do you think of that? I'd love to hear from you. Well, maybe we'll talk about it on Thursday night. It gets very heated very quick on that issue, doesn't it? All right, now moving on to a guy who has not been on the show before, but I'm very excited to have on for the first time. I've been following him on Twitter, and I watched a lot of his campaign when he was running for Virginia's 1st District for Congress. He is a Pakistani-born American author, a human rights activist, politician, and attorney. Previously served as a national spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in America. He's the author of several books, including The Wrong Kind of Muslim and Talk to Me. His new book is a children's book, and we talked about that. It's called Hannah and the Ramadan Gift. I'm really excited to introduce you to, if you don't already know him, because he's got a huge following on social media, like over 300,000 followers, at Qasim Rashid on Twitter, Qasim Rashid, Rashid. I had a great conversation with him. I really like him. I hope that he'll become a regular guest. I hope that you will like him too. Here it is right now. All right, here he is. I've told you all about him. I'm very excited to be in conversation, or at least have him as a guest on the show for the first time. Qasim, it's great to meet you virtually, which is how we meet people now. I look forward to meeting in person. Thank you so much for joining me.
Dominic, it's a privilege to be here, man. Thanks for sharing your platform.
Absolutely.
Right. Not Dominic, Pete Dominic. I should call you the Mr. Dominic, or can I call you Dom?
You can call me whatever you want. I mean, it doesn't matter. I feel like if you call me by my last name, I feel like we're on the soccer pitch. So you're about to pass it to me, you know?
I was thinking Dom from like Fast and Furious, and you guys kind of got the whole Vin Diesel thing going anyway. So
I'll take it. Oh, I'll take it. Usually people say you have the Montgomery Burns from The Simpsons thing going. So I will take Vin Diesel.
Cool. It is Vin Diesel. Let's do it.
Well, I'm a comedian, so people try to hurt you on purpose because they want to prepare themselves, defend against potential attacks. I've been watching you mostly on Twitter from afar, but I followed your campaign and supported you as much as I could. But I wanted to just get in a little bit of who you are. You recently, you were running for Congress, Virginia's 1st District. Unfortunately, you came up short. Do you have any question about your loss? Did you concede?
I did concede because I believe in democracy. And when the other guy gets more votes, you concede, which is what I've done. And unfortunately, the president yet hasn't. And my opponent who beat me in the 1st District is still supporting the president's refusal to concede. And at this point, someone said it on Twitter yesterday or the day before that it's not just enough to call that out as cowardly. I mean, this is actually behavior that's undermining our democracy. And it's destructive to the basic fabric of a peaceful transfer of power. So yes, I did concede. I feel like there's dignity in losing by admitting you lost and moving on to the next battle. And that's what we tried to make sure that we didn't further elongate a process that had already been decided.
What's your analysis or opinion on the Republicans in Congress, at least, just specifically, that are still supporting Trump and saying that he didn't lose and all of this, like putting Trump aside because he's just amazing. We understand what he's doing. If you understand a little bit about psychology, you just realize this is a guy who's never apologized. He's committed to not apologizing. He's a terrible person. He doesn't care about anybody, certainly not the country, much less the Senate majority. So putting him aside, I think what's worse than Trump is the more reasonable, more sane people like your opponent who must know better. But maybe, I don't know, is there any way to look at it other than just raw dishonesty?
Enablers. And this is where I draw a big distinction between the political GOP, pundits and politicians versus the ordinary conservative or Republican voter. These folks absolutely know better. And they know that this is contrary to every bit of common sense. And one example after another comes to mind. Let's take Ebola versus COVID. When 2 Americans died of Ebola, they were calling for Obama to resign, to shut down the borders, to strengthen our military, you name it. We're at 290,000 deaths so far, and they want to try to undo the election and give this man 4 more years. It's ridiculous. But what I learned, especially running for office, is that on a lot of these issues, and I just had an op-ed published in the Richmond Times-Dispatch a couple of days ago, a lot of these issues that seem to be super controversial, whether it's Medicare for all or Green New Deal or gun reform or reproductive health, the vast majority of Americans, 60 to 70%, even 80% on gun reform issues, we all agree. This is not an ideological battle. The debate's over. I mean, the jury's back and they've delivered their verdict. It's a matter of a few people clinging to power, upholding this, maniac in office now who refuses to do the will of the American people. That's what I've come to realize through my experience. And I think that's why we're seeing so much division and hate, because it's based on political differences, not ideological differences. And that nuance is really important.
Yeah, go ahead and explain a little bit more of what you mean by the political versus the ideological. Unpack the nuance, if you don't mind.
Well, let's take ideological. Let's take this question of Medicare for all, right? I believe healthcare is a human right. Republicans say they want healthcare. You ask any conservative, they'll say, yeah, we want healthcare. People should have healthcare. Democrats say the same thing. But then the question is, why have we not passed any kind of healthcare reform over the last 12 years since the ACA was passed? Why have the politicians on the right side of the aisle done nothing but try to strip away the ACA, especially when we know that over 70% of Americans support universal healthcare, Medicare for all system. 70% of America are not liberals. They're not Democrats. That's Republicans and Democrats working together. And so ideologically, we're aligned. But politically, if I'm a Republican voter and I know that, my Republican politician doesn't support that, even though it's what I want, well, for some reason, I have a stronger tie to my political affiliation than to my ideological affiliation. And that's to the detriment of America as a whole, because instead of finding out what is right, we're making a foregone conclusion of who is right and then contorting ourselves to support that, even if it's to our own detriment and against our own self-interest.
I think when you say political, I wonder if you would exchange the term tribal, if that's the same to you.
Yeah,
I
think that's a really good way to look at it. I mean, it's the lines between tribalism and political parties have become so blurred at this point. But yeah, there's a massive sense of tribalism here. And again, let's not ignore the elephant in the room, no pun intended, racism. Racism plays a significant role in this space as well, where we're willing to excuse, overtly racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic comments by this president, but then try to blame the past president, who, again, by no means was perfect, and you won't hear me claim he was perfect, on things that we look the other way here. And so that certainly is an element. And there's been a lot of research, that's delved into this. Professor Jonathan Metzer at the University of Tennessee writes Dying of Whiteness, where he already delves into this in a lot of detail.
Yeah, he's been on the show. It's a great book, and he's a great a great author and academic. Yeah, it's really good. But you yourself have you've dived into this yourself as a candidate and as a Muslim American, as a Pakistani American, however you want to identify. You can identify, I suppose, in several different roles. And I wanted to just get into a little bit of who you are, because I find your life story fascinating and what you've accomplished in your life and your run for Congress. It's all so interesting to me, your family, all of it. But because you come to these issues of, I think, xenophobia, ignorance, racism differently than, say, even I do. And I think with more grace and with more patience. And I think that's interesting given your background, given who you are, your family, your religion, which you hold dear. So tell me a little bit about how you got to be who you are. Like you were born in Pakistan and then your family moved to America. When? How old were you?
This is back. We moved here in 1987. I was almost 5. So just a little bit younger than my youngest daughter right now. And the short answer to your question is I've been extraordinarily blessed with some of the greatest teachers, starting from my folks to the teachers I've had in school. Mrs. Voss, my ESL teacher. I didn't speak a word of English when we first came here, and now I know like at least 12 words. My high school coaches, my law school professors. I mean, if I've done anything productive in my life, it's because I've had amazing teachers that just put things in perspective for me. But my approach to things like xenophobia and Islamophobia and racism and misogyny, this really, I think it stems a lot from what you just mentioned. My story. I belong to a minority Muslim community that's heavily persecuted in nations like Pakistan on a state level. And having seen
a minority, just if you wouldn't mind unpacking that, minority Muslim being within the Muslim community, it's for people who don't understand Islam, including myself, really, you can look at Christians and Methodists and Presbyterians and Catholics. They're all Christians, evangelicals, Baptists. They're all Christians, but they're often at odds.
Denominations.
Denominations. So you were your Muslim. What is it again? How do you say?
The Ahmadiyya Muslim community
is persecuted within the larger Muslim community in Pakistan. Is that what you're telling me? Or was?
That's correct. Okay. Yeah, that's correct. On a state level, and that's bled, no pun intended, into the societal level as well. And this persecution is violent. I mean, we're talking, attacks on mosques, the inability to even vote or run for office, legalized discrimination in the workplace. All of our books are banned, our websites are banned. It's pretty aggressive. But I share that context not to trash Pakistan. I mean, it's my birth country. I have love for my birth country just as I have love for the United States. But to put things in perspective, and what our response has always been is that your purpose, and this kind of is getting a bit into the religion aspect of it, but what Islam teaches as the primary responsibility for every person is service to humanity. Even more important than your 5 daily prayers and worshiping God is serving your humanity. You could be praying till you're blue in the face, but if your neighbor is starving, those prayers are worthless. They're meaningless. They're actually offensive to human dignity and to God. And so our primary focus and the way that, my parents really ingrained in me at a very young age is that your whole purpose of being here is to serve those around you and to make life better for those around you. And you don't do that just for the people who like you and treat you well. You do that because people are human beings and they deserve that inherent dignity. Now, obviously, you don't put yourself in harm's way, but at the same time, the perspective is, I'm not here to get into a Twitter battle and get offended because somebody called me a name. I'm trying to figure out 1 in 6 Americans are going hungry right now. How do we make sure they have enough food to eat? I'm trying to figure out, you got 46 million Americans living below the poverty line and right now about to face eviction because of this pandemic. How do we make sure we get them the relief that they need? 1 in 3 women will suffer sexual assault at some point in her life. How do we create a society where women have their basic integrity and safety protected? These are the kinds of problems that I think about. And so when I put things in that lens for myself, that doesn't mean that I'm somehow Superman and the insults don't affect me. Of course, they hurt. I'm a human being. But I'm trying to look at the bigger picture of things, is how do we create generational change so that my children, your children, this next generation of people, whether they're Muslim or not, believers or not, whatever their background, they have that same access to basic human dignity that every person deserves.
Tell me a little bit about your career and how you ended up running for Congress.
Well, it was
by trade, you're a lawyer, right?
Yeah, I am. I don't just play one on TV. My wife Aisha and I, we just celebrated 13 years of marriage.
Congratulations!
Thank you. I was working in business, and it was fine. It was a good paycheck, but it was one of those things where it was kind of a 9-to-5 job, not really where I wanted to be long term. My wife encouraged me to go to law school and get into human rights law, and I did, and got into a great law school program and started working with various nonprofit organizations working on women's rights issues, education. Worked in the Virginia State prison system pro bono to provide chaplaincy. And what you learn when you're an advocate is that these issues that impact all of us, whether it's hunger or depression or mental illness or addiction, I mean, all of these things that are plaguing society, right? Poverty, these aren't left or right issues. These aren't Republican or Democrat or libertarian or vegetarian issues, right? These are just issues that impact people. And so it's critical that we work together to address these issues, right? I mean, hunger doesn't care if you're black, white, yellow, purple, orange, blue. It cares in the least bit, not at all. And so we need to find ways to work together. But the second thing that I learned, this is where, the run for Congress really came into play, is that whereas advocacy can provide alleviation to that individual or maybe to that one group, there are systemic issues, systemic injustices that are harming society. Yeah. And we can talk about those, but those won't be fixed unless we have people at the table, the decision makers, focused on providing systemic relief and systemic reform. And so that's where, you talk about that rage and anger. That's where I channeled my anger that, 1 in 6 of my fellow Americans are going hungry right now in the wealthiest country in the world. It's preventable, but we don't have people in office who are willing to understand that pain on an intimate level enough to take action. And so that's where this, this idea of running for office really came to fruition. And then once my wife Aisha gave me permission to run, I jumped in and ran, and we weren't successful this time. I don't know what the future holds, but we're not done yet. We're going to keep fighting.
I always think that it's interesting to talk about what a nation is and what a country is from anybody's viewpoint. What's your experience living in America? But I always value and respect the opinion of anybody who has spent a good amount of time living in another country, about that country, whatever country. If we're talking about Canada, Pakistan, America, you have a better perspective on the country you live in if you lived in another country, if you lived in that system. Maybe that country's system was better, maybe it was worse by this measure or that measure. The point is you have a perspective. Americans generally don't. Americans generally don't leave. We don't have passports. We sometimes don't even leave our town our whole lives, much less the state and the nation. How do you understand, especially where you ran in your district? It's an interesting district there, kind of rural Virginia, right? Part of it at least. The issue that so many on the right have with immigration and immigrants in general, especially, let's just cut through the shit, brown people. From Latin America, from Arab Americans, etc. It's even worse. I mean, Trump even made that point. We'd like to take people from Norway, but not the shithole countries. But more importantly, when you think about that perspective, it used to be specifically that America was a beacon for refugees, which is completely different than immigrants. Completely different. And the organizations that brought refugees to America were overwhelmingly Christian-led organizations. Donald Trump and his administration shut down not only a Muslim ban, they said we wouldn't allow any more refugees from horrible war-torn countries, Syria and Central America. How do you understand that perspective, being an immigrant yourself, and how do you talk to somebody who's afraid of immigrants, and even worse, I'll say, afraid of refugees?
Yeah, I mean, and, Pete, you nailed the issue. There's a huge racial element behind this. People often forget there are 600,000 undocumented immigrants from Canada and Europe in the United States right now. 600,000. Have you ever seen somebody propose building a wall at the northern border? Did you ever see any Canadian white children in cages being separated from their parents, being separated from their breastfeeding mothers? Of course not. Right? We roll our eyes thinking about that.
But Canada and Mexico don't really want us coming in right now because of the virus.
We built our own wall, unfortunately, to keep us in. And then when you look at the history of immigration in America, there's the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Immigration Act of 1917, of 1924, that banned Mexicans, that banned South Asians, that banned Chinese. It wasn't until the Immigration and Nationalization Act of 1965 that you actually had an immigration policy that allowed people of color to immigrate. Before then, it was open borders. Remember, Donald Trump's own grandparents came here undocumented and fleeing. I think his grandfather fled Germany and Bulgaria because he didn't want to enlist in the service. And so, Dr. King talks about this as well, right? That for 266 years, Africans were trafficked here and forced to work, given no reparations. But then European immigrants came through open borders and got 140 acres through the Homestead Act, which, by the way, went all the way until 1987. A lot of folks don't realize how recent all this history actually is. And so what I try to point out is that the fears of refugees is not new. The SS St. Louis was carrying 1,100 Jewish refugees escaping the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, Hitler. And President Truman wouldn't even receive their cable. They were forced to go back to Germany, where a third of them were killed in the Holocaust by Hitler. And so one of the reasons why they didn't want these refugees coming in was because of the fear that among these Jewish refugees, there might be a secret Nazi soldier who's going to infiltrate the United States. And this is during the Holocaust, mind you. And so now when I hear people talk about, well, we can't have these Syrian refugees because there might be a secret ISIS member hiding in there, it throws me back to that. And I share the data with them that over the last 40 years of us accepting refugees, there hasn't been a single act of terrorism by a refugee. Not a single American's ever been killed by a refugee, not even one. So the point that I try to make is that it's a manufactured fear. It's a manufactured division, a manufactured crisis. But Pete, the problem with that, and I'm sure you already see this coming, is that the amount of time it takes to have that conversation is an order of 10 to the simple lie of they're refugees, they're rapists, they're not sending their best, they're sending their drugs, all sorts of nonsense that doesn't have any actual semblance in reality to who these refugees and asylum seekers actually are.
There's so much that I can talk with you about and I look forward to having more conversations with you. Only have a few more minutes, and I'm really happy to finally connect with you. But you've written several books as well. I mean, you're a really accomplished guy, really intelligent, obviously educated, honest, thoughtful man. But your new book is something different because it's a children's book. It's called Hannah and the Ramadan Gift. Now, you're a tweet that you have put out. What do we say? A tweet you put out? What am I, my father? You put out a tweet. In 2009, you wrote, I pitched a book with a Muslim girl of color as lead and was told there's no market for it. Today, I'm proud to share the cover to Hannah and the Ramadan Gift, which has a Muslim girl of color as the lead. And I hope everybody will go. Is it pre-order now, right? Yeah. Tell me about the idea behind this book and the story behind Hannah and the Ramadan Gift.
Well, Pete, representation matters. I was a voracious reader as a kid. Something that my parents and our teachers infused in us. And growing up, now that my wife Aisha and I have 3 kids of our own, buying books for them, there certainly are some books in this space, but just not enough, not very many compared to, one analogy I like to give is if you go on Amazon right now, you'll find over 25,000 books on Christmas, which is great. I've read almost every Christmas book I can imagine as a kid, but on Ramadan, you find maybe 100, if that, over the last 25 years. And so this was about, having another meaningful story of what Ramadan is like. The same way parents love watching their kids' eyes light up on Christmas morning, or Jewish parents love watching their kids during a bat mitzvah. Muslim parents love watching their kids during Ramadan and just the experience that they have. And so this was to capture that. And the way we wrote this book was designed not to be an Islamic book. This was meant to be a book that speaks to inclusion, that speaks to representation, that really emphasizes this element of service to humanity and how critical it is to have true love for humanity. And that's really what I like to call this book. It's a love story about a young girl finding out about the importance of having love for and serving all humanity. And it talks about her loving grandfather who kind of guides her along the way and the lessons that she learns along the way. And whether you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim, whether you're a person of faith or no faith, I'm confident that you'll find that this book really speaks to you on this really personal and direct level of how we can create a better, more compassionate society.
If I get this book, will it convert my daughters to Islam?
Absolutely. That's kind of my secret creeping Sharia goal. That this is going to come back and haunt me in a future campaign. But I figured let's just get the cat out of the bag right now.
You, sir. I hope will be a regular guest here. That was a test of humor, and you nailed it. That was great. So, I think that I always have trouble with religious people because of the patriarchy. You have spent a lot of time working against domestic violence, which overwhelmingly affects women and is overwhelmingly perpetrated by men. Not always, but overwhelmingly. That's just an issue that I've spent a lot of time working on. I always feel like it all comes from patriarchy, which comes all from religion. And disabuse me of that, or square how you or what your faith says and how you see this really important issue that sadly is only getting worse. It was trending in the wrong way before the pandemic, and obviously there's more spousal abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse during the pandemic for a lot of different reasons. But how do you look at the accusations and generalizations I'm making about religion and patriarchy and what that means for domestic abuse, being someone who has spent a lot of his time and career fighting against it?
Well, patriarchy is a universal cancer. It's not tied to any one religion or any one nationality. You can go to, the United States is the number 10 most dangerous country for women in the world due to violence against women. You can go to Hindu majority India is one of the top most violent countries for women. State atheist China is one of the top 3 most violent countries for women as well, due to the systemic violence against women. This is a state atheist nation where the majority of people are non-believers. Mm-hmm. So it's not religion, it's men, it's us guys. Men need to be more accountable, and we need to hold other men more accountable. Even the phrase violence against women right? It completely removes men from the equation, right? It's that it's like this magical violence is happening, that women are walking around, this violence is attacking them from the sky, right?
That's great. I never thought about that. As much time as I've thought about this and worked on it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it's one of those like eureka moments that we all have, and I can't take credit for that. That was from one of my mentors, a wonderful woman who's like, you need to think about how you approach this issue. It's not just this magical violence; it's men who commit violence against women. And so, for me, I approach this two ways. One is that as human beings, every person has inherent value and an inherent equality, and we need to be able to have laws and legislation and regulations that protect that and forbid anyone from violating that basic. So the Equal Rights Amendment, for example, which is waiting to become the next amendment of the Constitution. Hopefully under this new president administration, we can finally ratify it. Although, it's going to require Congress to pass some procedural changes, but we can get it done.
Every time I hear that, by the way, every time I hear somebody talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, which I think was introduced in what year?
1970s, something like that,
that it's not actually part of our law. Every time I hear it, I cringe and I get filled with kind of embarrassment. I'm like, what? How is that not a thing in America? But sorry, go ahead.
Well, women couldn't get credit on their own until the 1970s in America either, right?
My mom told me that. My mom told me recently. My mom's now 75. She said something about, I think it was like my dad had to like co-sign for her to get a checking account maybe or something. I was like, nah, you're kidding me, Mom. She was like, yep.
Absolutely right. Well, I'm a big proponent of universal basic income as well. And UBI almost passed under Nixon. It got nixed, not by Nixon, but because of a bogus study that said that if you give UBI to women, they will result in liberated women, and it will cause women to divorce their husbands.
It will.
We can't have independent, liberated
women.
Women.
It actually will. I think that's true. I'll never get hearing Esther Perel's talk about Romanian communists. The divorce rate was like, whatever the divorce, it was like 94% done by the women. It will liberate women to leave the men. That's actually, I think that's true. And that's good. Money shouldn't keep you in a dangerous relationship.
Thank you. And so this is the second part of it, that for me, from a faith perspective, I tell people that Islam can't be judged by these draconian nations like Saudi Arabia that have just completely bastardized every basic sense of decency. You need to look at what the example is, and that's the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, and what his example was. I mean, his dying words were, women are your committed partners, not your subordinates, not your slaves, they're your partners. And a partner is by definition equal. From an Islamic perspective, I have zero right over my wife's income, none whatsoever. She has equal rights over my income. It is my requirement, my obligation to ensure I provide her financial support. And so, when it comes to all these issues that we're talking about, whether it's the Equal Rights Amendment, whether it's the right to become lawyers, the right to run public office, for education, these were not things that Islam permitted women to get 1,400 years ago. These were things that Islam mandated as equal things in writing 1,400 years ago. The Prophet's wife, Khadija, was a twice widowed, wealthy businesswoman. After she died, his wife Aisha was one of the greatest scholars, legal jurists that Islamic history has ever seen. Women couldn't become lawyers until the 1890s, 1900s. So whenever people talk about, the patriarchy in Islam, I just redirect them and say the patriarchy is among some Muslim men who have confidence issues and insecurity issues, and they project that upon women. But that's not unique to Islam. That's unique to men. And that's where the burden and responsibility has to exist.
Well, even if you had, legitimate criticisms of Islam or Judaism, often people would say, when I was hosting a live show for 14 years on Sirius XM, people would call in and often, or now tweet to say, well, how come you never talk about Islam? It's anti-gay. Or how come you don't talk about, fundamentalist religions of other sort? And I say, listen, we can and we should, but I'm an American and they don't have any power. There are no one Muslim in Congress. They're not making laws. They're certainly not making laws based on their religion anywhere. That would be outrageous. The people who are making laws based on their religion are Christians. 95% of them are Christians. They're the Christian right, whatever you want to call them. But they're insane and they're cruel and they're against human rights and civil rights. And so that's why we should talk more about Christianity and what it is doing to oppress people in America if we're talking about America, because the minority religions have hardly any power or influence even in their own communities, is my argument. What do you say to that?
And this is where we need to have a clear line of separation of religion and state. When people, call out the theocracies of Saudi Arabia and Iran, I'm like, yeah, call it out. I've been publishing op-eds in this space for over a decade. Where have you been? I've been talking about this for a long time. Thank you for finally showing up. And here in the United States, separation of religion and state is something that we need to focus on. If people want to believe in God, by all means, believe in God, worship as much as you want, have whatever belief you want. Just don't legislate it upon me. Let me decide on my own. And then the second thing is, when it comes to criticism of religion, including my own faith, Islam, have at it. By all means. I will never say or advocate to stop criticism of a religion. Religions don't have rights. People have rights, right? Ideas don't have rights. People have rights. I will draw the line when you're demonizing people and advocating for violence against people, because now, your free speech ends where my nose begins. But until and unless we can criticize ideas, including religions, we can't improve. We can't strengthen as a community. We can't get rid of tribalism. And that goes back to kind of, where our conversation started, that we need to be able to test ideas and find out what is right, not decide who is right, and then contort ourselves to some tribalistic mindset that can often be self-inflicting.
I hate to end our conversation. I want to just say thank you for joining me. Made my day, because I knew that I was going to enjoy this. Like I said, I've been following you for a long time. I'm really disappointed you didn't win because you'd have been an amazing person in Congress. I hope that you'll keep pursuing a career in public service one way or another. I know you're going to do good no matter what you're doing, even as a role model for your own family. But it's great to introduce you to my audience, who, unless they already know you. And I really looking forward to talking to you again, because you are really an expert on so many different policies, having run and having had this career. There's so much to discuss with you, and I'm so excited to finally talk to you. Qasim, great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. God bless you, man.
Great guy. Really enjoyed talking to him. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. He's got so much to say about so many different issues that I love to talk about and learn about here on the show along with you, because that's what we do. We learn every day. I try to be positive. I try to grow. I try to evolve. And I fail. All the time I fail. And I'm just going to keep getting back up and keep on trying and learning how to be a better guy, how to be a better person, a more thoughtful person, a more generous, kind, patient person. Everybody has room to grow, and this show has helped me with your support so much. And I know I've heard from so many people that it's helped you as well. So thank you very much for your paid subscription, because I cannot do it without you. While it is free, it is not cheap. I put a lot of hours into it each and every day and every week. Thank you to my guest, Dr. Aaron Carroll, Qasim, Rashid, all of my subscribers to the show. I hope to see you on Thursday night at 8. We're going to talk with Michael Cohen, Boston Globe, and maybe another guest as well. Start inviting more people to these Zooms, and maybe I'll do another one each week too. Always want to hear from you and your feedback. Thank you very much. Check us out on the Discord platform if you are a subscriber, because that way you're never alone. I was hanging out with people last night at 11 o'clock. Who am I shitting? I'm taping this right now. It's like almost midnight, and I was just talking to Pete and Scott at home on the Discord platform. We'd love to have you in there all hours. There's always someone in there hanging out to chat with. That way you're never alone. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. Hit it, Johnny.
What you